Welcome to RAW Confession. If you like crazy, unbelievable stories, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss them out. Let's hop into today's story.
George Waters sat at the bar nursing his room and coke, patiently waiting for a message to come across his phone. As she sipped his drink, he thought about the events that led him to this point in his life. Born 36 years ago in Anchorage, Alaska, he married Linda, his high school's sweetheart. Right after graduation, he went to work on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline and spent several weeks at a time going from Prudhoe Bay to Valdez, fixing various problems as they arose. He came home one day after spending a grueling week on the road to find his wife in bed with note one buddy of his former classmates after protestations that it really didn't mean anything, and it was only intimacy. He divorced her and joined the Army to get as far away from the situation as he could. He eventually met and married his second wife, Jessica, while stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas. He thought he had hit the jackpot, but learned just the opposite. After returning from a 12-month deployment to Iraq, he found her having intimacy with another soldier on the base and divorced her. That marriage lasted a little less than years. About the same time as his marriage to Linda, he threw himself into his work and became the best soldier he could. He had one job: kill the enemy. And he became damn good at it. After his stint in the Army, he was recruited as a freelancer working for various interests in places like Africa and the Middle East. He also worked in Myanmar, helping an ethnic minority against a brutal regime. In short, had become a soldier of fortune, a mercenary, and a highly paid and sought-out one. That his ruthlessness, efficiency, and brutality in the field were just a few of the things that attracted potential clients. Part of what set George apart from the other contractors was the fact that he chose his clients with care. He refused to work for anyone who dealt with drugs or human trafficking. For example, several times she took lower-paying jobs simply because he agreed with his benefactor cause. Another thing that set them apart from the others was his choice of weapon. While others opted for more modern hardware, he used an old World War II vintage Thompson submachine gun, or SMG, that he bought from a somewhat shady character who claimed it had been used by another mercenary in the Congo War of the S. Legend has it Patty Hearst bought this gun after she heard it. The man said George called bull on that claim. He was familiar with the old song. Still, the weapon seemed to call out to him, and it felt good in his hands. It was almost as if they were made to be together. The weapon was in excellent shape and came complete with 2 large magazines and a drum that held. Caliber ACP pistol rounds only had an effective firing range of about m, but the trench broom, as it had been called, was deadly, and it suited him just fine. He especially liked that it was designed to be fired from the hip. It cost him a pretty penny, to be sure, but it was deadly at close range and very reliable. After a decade of working as a mercenary, he tired of the constant fighting and came back home, hoping to put his past behind him and start a family. He became a freelance consultant for a private security company and settled down. He met his current wife, Susan, at a social event where he had been hired to organize security. Susan was an attorney for the firm of Freeman and Douglas. He literally bumped into her at the event as she was making her way to the bar. He caught her as she stumbled, preventing her from falling to the hard floor. He thought nothing of it at the time, but Susan was instantly taken with the tall, quiet, and well-built man with the ragged scar across his face. They spent a lot of time talking that night and began dating. He was very careful not to reveal too much of his background, only telling her that he worked overseas as a contractor. After his 4-year stint in the Army, he became very creative when she asked about the scars that dotted his body, and he certainly never told her about his secret overseas accounts. He had already been burned twice and wasn't about to go through that again. They fell in love and married a year after they first met, and George thought he had finally found his one true soulmate. At first, things were great between the two. They enjoyed each other's bodies several times a week, and they got along well. Sure, they had their disagreements like every married couple does, but they worked through them. They were even talking about having children, and bought a 2-story, 3-bedroom house in a nice suburban neighborhood. Then things started going off the rails. Susan began spending more time at the office, working on various cases and going out for drinks with the girls and other coworkers. This raised a few red flags, but then came the summer party her firm put on. He went with Susan, as he always did, but he knew there would be problems. The instant he walked in, Susan introduced him to her co-workers as she always did, but then she introduced him to the newest attorney in the firm, Michael Van Owen, for a moment. George experienced a bout of délire vu. He hoped this wasn't the same Van Owen he knew from Africa, but as he looked at the tall man with the chiseled face, his hopes were dashed. It was the same man, a man who once recruited him and fought with him but became a turncoat after being offered more money allegedly from a federal agency grant that was several years ago. But George was not a man known for being very forgiving, and he never forgot a face. George came face to face with the man who once tried to kill him. Van Owen extended his hand, a smirk on his face, but George simply walked away. Susan ran after him, calling to him, "George, sweetie, what's wrong? Why were you so rude to Mike?" George couldn't tell Susan the whole story without revealing his true past. "I don't trust that man. Something about him bothers me. I'm sorry, I really can't explain." "Well, you're just going to have to get over it. Mike and I are working on several projects now, and we'll be spending a lot of time together. Now get it together and come join us at the table you're working with him." George asked Susan and nodded her head. "Yes, we are coming on. We need to get back to the party." Susan grabbed his hand and led him back to their table. He held her back for a moment. "I'm letting you know, Susan, you need to be careful of him," he said. "Don't worry, I'll be careful now. Come on, you're embarrassing me." He let her lead him back to the table where they sat down. Van Owen sat across from them, eyeing George carefully. Maybe George thought he was worried that he might get out. Susan went to another table to speak with some of her colleagues. Van Owen leaned over the table and looked George in the eye. "I hope you understand that what happened in Africa wasn't personal. It was just business. But now that I know Susan is your wife, it just became personal. Know this, I intend to do everything I can to take her from you. I should have hunted you down like the dog you are and killed you back in Africa." George said, "And I'm warning you, if you have intimacy with my wife, I will kill you." Van Owen laughed. "You're such a clueless romantic. George, you always where I've already tasted your wife, and I intend to have her brains out right in front of you before it's over. Then I'll finish the contract on you. I'll bet she doesn't know about your past. Does she? Who knows? Maybe I'll fill her in. But I'll call a truce for tonight for old times' sake. I'm warning you, Van Owen, this won't end well for you. Let it go and leave Susan out of it." Van Owen smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. Susan came back to their table and looked at the two men. "I see you two are getting to know each other." She said, "Yes, we know exactly where we stand, don't we, George?" Van Owen asked. "Yes," George said in a neutral tone of voice. Susan looked back and forth between them, wondering what was going on between the two men. She also wondered if Mike had told George about their affair. She knew George wouldn't tolerate her infidelity, especially after what his previous wives had done to him. She sat down next to her husband, and the three of them ate their meals. George and Van Owen watched each other carefully the whole time. Susan felt as though she could cut the tension between them with a knife after the meal and the obligatory speeches. Susan grabbed George's hand and dragged him to the dance floor. George held her tight, feeling her body close to his. Normally, he relished her closeness, but not this time as they danced. He kept a close eye on Van Owen, who was also watching them. "What's going on, George? You feel tense like a coiled snake. Talk to me. How well do you know?" Van Owen asked. "We've been working together on some projects. Why didn't you answer my question? How well do you know him?" "What do you mean?" she asked. "You know what I mean. Have you slept with him?" She looked at him shocked. "Of course not. How could you ask such a thing? Let me rephrase that. Have you had intimacy with him?" Her body flinched slightly after he asked, giving him his answer. "I see how long it has been going on, George. It doesn't mean anything," she replied. "It means everything to me. Susan, you know what I've been through, and you know how I feel about infidelity. I won't stand for it. Tell me, dear wife, what do you know about your lover?" "Not much," she said. George noticed that she didn't deny the affair. "He came to work for us about months ago. He supposedly did contract work for a federal agency. He's dangerous, and if you want to have any kind of future with me, you'd better end it with him." ASAP looked at him, wondering what was going through his mind. "Is that a threat?" she asked. I don't make threats. It's a warning, and you'd better take heed. Otherwise, it won't end well. What do you mean? She asked. Just trust me. It won't end well for you, for him, and for us. You're scaring me. George, she said, you'd better be scared. He said, what aren't you telling me? George, what's going on really? She asked. I can't tell you. You'll just have to trust me. How long has it been going on between you two? Not long, she said, a tear falling down her face. Maybe a couple months. A couple months, I see. Are you in love with him? No, I only love you, she replied. You sure have a funny way of showing it. He said, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. It was just one of those things. I felt attracted to him, and it just happened. George said calmly, causing her to flinch. You could have said no, but you didn't. Please believe me, I really do love you, and I don't want to lose you, all right? Then you won't have any problem ending it. Why don't you tell him to leave you alone right here and now in front of me? Okay, if that's what I have to do, let's go break it to him right now if that's what you want, she said nervously. They walked off the dance floor and headed back to their table. Van Owen was standing, watching them approach. My wife has something she'd like to tell you. George said. Mike looked at Susan, who appeared scared. Mike knows we can't see each other anymore. I'm a married woman, and I want to stay that way. Van Owen nodded his head. I see, he said, looking at George. Well, I guess the better man won again. He added, extending his hand. No hard feelings ran. He looked at Mike's extended hand, a frown on his face. Refusing to shake Mike's hand, he drove Susan away and led her to the exit. Are we leaving already? She asked yes, and he said when they got to their car. George surprised Susan. Again, by inspecting the vehicle before getting inside, he even opened the trunk and the hood looking for wires or anything else out of place. Satisfied that the car wasn't booby-trapped, he seated Susan and got inside. What was all that about, Susan? You can never be too careful. They rode home in silence. George was fuming, and Susan was scared, not knowing what her husband was going to do. She hoped that her performance at the party convinced him enough to let her affair go, but she still had concerns. Looking at her husband, she suddenly didn't recognize him. It was like looking directly into the face of death itself. Are we okay? She asked, scared of what he might say. That's up to you so long as you stay away from Van Owen. Yes, in fact, I think you should resign and find another place to work. I can't do that. I'm working on some very sensitive projects right now, and if I'm successful, I might be made a partner in the firm. George looked at her. So you're telling me your job is more important than our marriage? No, it's just that I'm at a crucial point in my career, and I can't afford to screw it up right now. You've already screwed up our marriage. My gut tells me I should kick your back to the curb, and I still might if I find out that you're still screwing Van Owen. It's over. She nodded her head. I understand, but you need to tell me what's going on between you two. I already told you I couldn't reveal that. Let's just say we've dealt with each other before and leave it at that. Susan nodded her head, but decided to confront Mike. George decided at that moment he would try to patch things up with Susan, but it would be a trust but verify situation. The first chance he got, he contacted an old friend who specialized in surveillance work. Mike Matthews had gotten in trouble with the law as a child, but those who knew him simply said he was an excited boy. Mike wasn't quite as proficient with firearms as the others on his team, but he was the best reconnaissance and surveillance man George had ever met. He was also a good planner and could assess a situation within seconds. George often said he trusted Mike's guesses more than other people's so-called facts. What Van Owens is alive? Are you sure about that? Oh yeah, and he's been screwing my wife, that son of a blip. What do you need from me, whatever it is? I'll do it right now. I need surveillance audio video, the works. How much will you charge me for that? Hey, I owe you my life several times over. Consider it a favor. Thanks. I appreciate that, but at least let me cover your expenses. Buy me a beer when it's over, okay? Mike replied, Consider it done, my friend. So what do you intend to do with them if they're still, involved? Mike asked, We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. It didn't take very long for George to get the evidence he needed. A week after speaking with Mike, he held a large manila envelope that contained pictures and a USB drive with several high-definition videos. That Friday, he sat at his kitchen table with the envelope, waiting for his wife to come home. His caliber pistol also sat on the table. It was 6:30 p.m. when she opened the door and walked inside. She went into the kitchen and saw her husband sitting at the table with an envelope and a pistol in front of him. She instinctively knew that she had been caught. "Sit down," wife George said in a neutral tone. She remained standing. "I said sit down." He thundered. She quickly pulled out a chair and sat down. "So you caught me," she said. George slowly nodded his head. "Do I need to show you the pictures?" Her eyes opened wide. "You have video?" She asked. "Yes, in high definition." "I must say you should have become a porn star." "You know what was worse than seeing you actually intimating with that piece of blip, George?" "I don't," she said quietly, "hearing the two of you disrespect me." Susan dropped her head, tears falling down her cheeks, knocking off the crying. "You made me a promise, and then you broke it. How could you do that to us? Have I been that bad a husband to you? Have I ever abused you or treated you badly?" "What do you think?" he asked rhetorically. She looked at him definitely. "Know this. That would be the biggest mistake you could ever make. I know all about you now. What was it they called you?" "Oh yes, George the Heartless. Thompson Gunner. How many men have you killed in your career as a mercenary? You know all that will come out in the divorce. I also know that you're wanted in several countries." George chuckled. If the stupid blip knew that he thought she would also have known how it tended to destroy his enemies. She had no idea what she was messing with. First of all, that old name was from some song back in the Sitwish. Headless, not artless. You can see me head is still very much attached to my body, and I hail from Alaska, not Norway. Second, I've done nothing illegal, at least not in the US, and the governments in those other countries have changed since I was last there, and we don't have any extradition treaties with them. Well, the IRS might be very interested in your offshore accounts, you know, the ones where all your money is hiding. I'm talking about the money you haven't paid any taxes on." She answered. George smiled again. "If you had taken the time to look, you would have known that those old accounts were set up by your lover a long time ago, and they're empty right now and have been for years." Her face went white as she continued. "That's right, your lover is the one who first recruited me into the business. Oh, hadn't tell you that, did he? I'll be the also didn't tell you that he was right. There with me deep in all the blood and gore for years, and I'll be the never told you about the contract he was given to kill me. What, that can't be true. Oh, but it is, dear wife. He came very close to killing me too. It stopped him though and almost killed him. But he escaped and never saw or heard from him again, until the party. Imagine my surprise to see him there. 'I don't believe you,' she said. 'Didn't you see the scare in his inner thigh? I gave him that scar when I shot them. I was aiming for his balls, but his zigged thought that was going to zag. It was just a flesh wound, but I'll bet it had to hurt. By the way, did he tell you that he intends to kill me?' Well, no, it can't be true." She replied, "Oh, but it is true, dear wife, and I know that he told you because I have it all on video. I also have your response. Would you like to see it?" "So what are you going to do? You still planning to go with him on your little cruise?" "You know which one I'm talking about, the cruise you two plan to take this weekend, while telling me you have a meeting with clients out of towns. You know about that?" She asked as a matter of fact. "I do. I've known for a while. I even took the liberty of packing your suitcase." "How did you know?" she asked. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I do know he didn't tell her that Mike would be on the cruise, keeping him informed of their activities." "Mike's coming here to pick me up this evening," she said. George shook his head. "I don't think so. In fact, if that man shows up here, I'll kill both of you where you stand and make it look like self-defense. You'd better call him right now and make other arrangements. You wouldn't dare," she hissed. George picked up the pistol. "You really want to try me? I didn't think so. Call your lover now." He cocked his pistol to drive home to the point where Susan pulled out her phone and dialed and put it on speakerphone. George commanded. She obeyed, and soon they both heard Mike pick up the phone. "Hey baby, are you ready for me to come pick you up? No, sweetie? I'll come to your place, and we can go from there and come on. We planned it this way, no, sweetie." George roared. "She's coming to you, and I never want to see either of you again if you step foot in my house. So help me God, I'll blow your brain out." "He means it," Susan said nervously. "Yeah, I do." George said, Okay, calm down. I'll stay here. Promise me you won't hurt her, Mike." "I won't hurt her so long as she leaves right now, and neither one of you crosses my path ever again." George said. He looked at his soon-to-be ex-wife. Call me as soon as you get there, and call me as soon as you get to the airport. I'll know where you are the whole time." He turned back to the phone, "And if you double-cross me again, Van Owen, I promise I won't miss it." "I got it," George said. George grabbed the phone from Susan and ended the call. He handed her the phone and motioned toward the door. "Get out!" He told Susan to take a step in his direction while reaching for his face. George backed up. "Stay away from me," he said. She recoiled from his words and his tone of voice. "You've lost the right to touch me or kiss me. Just grab your blip and get the blip out." She headed for her luggage and looked back at her husband. "I'm sorry, George." She said, "Yeah, you are. By the way, you should know that once Van Owen is finished with you, he'll double-cross you the way he did me, and believe me, he'll have no problem killing you. I'm not saying he will. I'm just letting you know who you're dealing with. Just know that I won't be there to pick up the pieces when he dumps you." "Don't you love me anymore?" she cried. He shook his head. "No, I did once. I even gave you a second chance, something I almost never do, but then you decided to betray me. I don't associate with traitors, and that's what you are now." She nodded her head and slowly walked out the door. A half-hour later, she called to let him know she was at Van Owen's condo. Another half-hour later, she called to say they were at the airport. "Goodbye, wife. Enjoy what's left of your worthless life." "What does that mean?" she asked. "You know the old saying about laying down with dogs? Just remember what I said." He ended the call and dialed Mike's number. "They're at the airport." He said when Mike answered, "I'll be in touch over the next day or so." George got regular updates about Van Owen and his wife. It seemed they were having a grand old time on the cruise on the second day of their cruise. George went to a local bar and half-heartedly watched a game on the large television as he nursed his drink. A few people, including the bartender, tried to engage him in conversation, but quickly left him alone after he made it clear he had no desire for company. After an hour or so, his phone buzzed. He looked and saw it was a call from Mike. He answered and spoke to his friend. "What's up?" he asked. "Bob, your wife is in danger." Mike said, "What's going on?" He asked, "Just as you predicted. I overheard Van Owen talking with some guerrillas. He's taking her to an island now, and I'm following in another boat. He intends to hand her over to them as a sex slave." "Do you know where they're going?" George asked his boss. "There are only 700 islands in the Bahamas, but Van Owen let the cat out of the bag when he was talking to the guerrillas." "When is this handoff supposed to take place?" George asked. "From what I heard, in about hours. There's just enough time for you to get here if you want to extract her." George hated what his wife did, but he couldn't live with himself if he let her get put into that situation, or worse yet, dead. There was no other choice. Van Owen had to die, and he would deal with Susan's betrayal later. "Text me the coordinates and lineup." "Transportation," George said. "Already done. Boss details are on the way to you now." George smiled. That was one of the things he appreciated about Mike. Not only was he loyal, he knew how to plan ahead. "Thanks, Mike. I'll see you soon." "I'll be here." Mike said, ending the call. George put his phone away, paid his tab, and headed home. Once there, he went to the attic where he kept his gear. He unlocked the large chest and opened it. There it was, his Thompson gun covered and oiled, waiting for his touch. He picked it up and inspected it. Everything was still clean, oiled, and in good order. He grabbed a loaded drum and a large magazine. He figured 1,000 rounds should do the trick. If not, he was sure there would be other weapons lying around. If it got to that point, he grabbed the rest of his gear and dressed for work. Once done, he headed out to a small landing strip where he knew a small Lear jet was waiting for him. He spoke with the pilot for a minute and gave him the coordinates. Mike texted him along with an envelope of cash. A few minutes later, the plane was airborne. George examined the map Mike sent him and got a lay of the land, although mostly uninhabited. The small island had a landing strip that was mostly used by smugglers and guerrillas. He studied the map carefully and had a good idea of what he would do. He went into the bathroom, finished applying his camouflage paint, and donned his fighting gear. He looked at himself in the mirror before he left and mentally prepared himself for the bloody work ahead. He double-checked himself and his gear and left the restroom. Sometime later, He looked out at the darkness and could make out the island below him. Looking carefully, he could see what appeared to be a campfire. The jet began its approach and landed on the dirt strip. After the plane slowed to a stop, he opened the door. The pilot came into the cabin and looked at his passenger. George looked back at him. Waiting for my signal, he told the pilot, who acknowledged him with a nod of his head. George stepped off the plane to find Mike running up to him. "This way," Mike said, turning back the way he came. He couldn't miss it. "Van Owen has a nice fire going," George said quietly. "Stupid." I could see it. 20 meters out, they quietly worked their way through the vegetation, mostly to help keep the rounds in the drum from rattling too much, and 10 minutes later found themselves on the edge of the camp. George and Mike knelt down and looked the campsite over. Susan was naked and tied to the ground, her arms and legs spread wide, in addition to Van Owen. George spotted 3 gorillas. Susan was crying and begging to be let go. "Please, Mike, don't do this. Don't I mean anything to you?" He laughed. "Yeah, you mean about $250,000. To me right now, once the boss makes it here, we'll make the exchange you for the other half of my bounty, and you'll be off to live your new life, and there's nothing your stupid, wimpy husband can do about it." The 3 gorillas laughed in response. One of them stood over Susan and started unzipping his trousers. "Put that away. El Capitan wants her fresh." You know that the gorilla zipped his pants back up unhappy. George looked at Mike, who was holding his .45 caliber pistol, then consulted his watch. It was time to move. He gave Mike a hand signal, and the two moved out quietly. They approached the camp as Van Owen and the gorillas gathered around the fire. George motioned for Mike to stay behind him and take cover. Mike obeyed without question as George slowly moved into the camp. The 4 men heard George as he placed the weapon in automatic firing mode, which required 2 switches to be turned, one to take it off safe and another to place it in full auto mode. Without saying a word, he pulled the charging handle back, and before the gorillas could react, he unleashed several short bursts of automatic fire from the hip, sending the gorillas flying back. A couple of the gorillas managed to get some rounds off, but they missed George by a long shot. After the gorillas were dispatched, George placed the gun on his shoulder and took careful aim before Van Owen could react. George sent a 3-round burst at his head, effectively blowing it off. The whole incident took just a few seconds. George looked around to make sure everything was secure. That's when he noticed Susan, and one of the shots fired by the gorillas managed to hit her in the side. Mike knelt over her as George watched. She looked up at George with sad eyes. "I'm sorry," she wheezed soon, her eyes glazed over. George had seen enough death to know she was gone. Mike checked for a pulse and looked up at him. "She's dead, boss. Do we take her back with us?" George hawked up a glob of phlegm and spit on her face. He thought for a moment as he observed the sputum covering her left eye, then shook his head. "No, El Capitan is expecting to pick up a blonde. I think he should get what he paid for." "Don't you damn, you're a cold-blooded boss." Mike said. George chuckled at that. "You know it, my old friend. Come on, let's get her over to the fire." She wanted to be with Van Owen. She can burn with him forever. They dragged her lifeless form to the fire, and George used the wads of cash to stoke the fire, handing 1 bundle of Mike's to his friend. "Consider it a bonus," he said as Mike pocketed the cash. They put Susan's nude body on the growing fire, followed by Van Owen and the 3 dead gorillas. "Help me police up this brass. There's no sense in leaving too many." Clues after he and Mike collected the spent .45 caliber shell casings, they headed out to the plane. The pilot was waiting for them and took off as soon as they entered the cabin. Mike watched his old friend as the plane headed back to the States. George sat in a back seat, looking out the window, drinking a beer while smoking a fairly expensive cigar. Mike had seen this many times before and knew better than to interrupt at least until the first beer was finished. "If I join you," Mike asked when George opened his second beer. George handed him a beer and a cigar and motioned for him to sit. "We've been through some, haven't we?" Mike asked. George nodded his head as he looked out the window. "You know, I'm really sorry about all this. I know, Mike, I warned her. God damn it all. I warned her this would happen. Stupid blip, just wouldn't listen. So what do we do now? You think about going back in the business?" Nah, I'm getting too old for this. Too sentimental, you sentimental. That'll be the day, Mike asked. Yeah, you notice I didn't even cut anyone's head off. I noticed that Mike said George was known for decapitating his defeated enemies as a way of striking fear in the hearts of anyone who might oppose him. I couldn't do it, even after everything that cheating woman did. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Mike nodded his head in understanding. I understand, boss. I remember a time when I would have skinned her alive and played with her bones like tinker toys. Whatever you decide to do, you know I'll always have your back. George looked at him and raised Ed his beer. Mike returned the gesture of touching his beer to George. I know, Mike. You always have had my back. You and I are the last of our team. You know that, right? Yeah, boss, I do. Mike replied, someone has to survive. Someone has to be around to tell the tale. You're not going to do what I think you are. Are you please don't do that? Mike asked no. Besides, you know old mercenaries like us never die. Yeah, they just go to hell to regroup. George laughed and took another drink from his beer. You got that right. He said he didn't speak again for a couple minutes. We're going to have to put on a good act for the next few weeks. You know, yeah, I know some people are going to want to know what the hell happened, but we don't know anything. Do we? George asked not a goddamn thing. I'll make sure the pilot understands as well. George nodded at his head. It's amazing how much silence money can buy, along with the threat of a bullet in the back of the head. After the plane landed, George gave the pilot another envelope of cash, and Mike stayed behind to ensure the pilot's continued silence. George drove home, cleaned up, and put his gear away, hoping he would never have to use it again, exhausted. He finally fell asleep in the bed he once shared with Susan. George went about his business as normal, putting Susan behind him as much as possible. When the ship reported that she was not on board, he filed a missing persons report and put on a good act for the officers who eventually questioned him. They accepted his story of his absence. He was able to put them off successfully and managed to get a few digs into them as well. Surely they knew about her fling with Van Owen. He waited patiently, and 1 year after Susan left for her cruise, he filed for divorce on the grounds of abandonment. 60 days later, the divorce was final, and George was a free man, still stinging from her actions. However, George refused to consider another exclusive relationship with a woman. Things went on as normal for George until a week before Christmas, when he heard a knock on his door. He looked through the peephole and saw 2 men in dark suits and glasses fed. He thought he opened the door, and one pulled out a set of credentials. George Waters, the man, asked, "Yes, Special Agent Smith. This is Agent Jones, FBI. Can we come in and talk for a moment?" "Sure," George said, letting the 2 men inside. They looked around the house as they came in. "Please have a seat." "May I get you something to drink?" "Thanks, but that won't be necessary." Smith said, taking a seat in George's favorite recliner. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" George asked. "Have you ever been to the Bahamas?" Smith asked George and shook his head. "No. Why, what about your wife?" he asked his ex-wife. "She left me over a year ago with her lover, and I have no idea where they went." "Would that be one?" Michael Van Owen. Smith asked. "Yes." George said, "We received a tip from Bahamian authorities who found their remains on one of their islands. They've been identified as being your ex-wife." And Mr. Van Owen, "Yes, you wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Mr. Waters?" "No, nothing. Why just wrap up some loose ends? That's all we've had." Van Owen was on our radar for a while, then he suddenly disappeared. It seems he was involved in human trafficking while pretending to be an upright citizen. From what we could tell, it looks like he may have had a disagreement with one of his business associates. What kind of disagreement? And what does Susan have to do with all this? Please, Mr. Waters, don't insult our intelligence. We know all about you. You're something of a legend in certain parts of the world with your Thompson gun. You know personally. I can't imagine why anyone would want to carry a noisy old relic like that, but I guess to all his own you don't believe I had anything to do with what happened to Susan. Do you, George asked? No ex-wife was shot with a 9, not a .45. There were 4 other bodies found, including Van Owen, and they all appear to have been shot with a .45. That's a fairly common round, though, and we're pretty certain it wasn't you. And why is that, George asked. All the brass was policed from the area, and none of the victims were decapitated. I see, George replied. We just wanted to make sure you hadn't decided to go back into business, young. Have your no, not back into that business, getting too old to be out trudging through some jungle somewhere good, because I'd sure hate it if I had to arrest you. Yeah, me too. George said. Smith and Jones stood up and shook George's hand. That's all we have for now. If you hear anything, give me a call, he added, giving George a card. Thanks, George said. Smith nodded his head. Merry Christmas, Mr. Waters said as they left. He considered calling Mike, but his friend beat him to the punch. Hey boss, I wanted to give you a heads up. I know they just left here. They spoke to me as well. I told them nothing. They said they were just wrapping things up. They told me the same thing. Hey, why don't we go have a beer? Mike agreed, and the two men met that night at a local bar. Their beers had just been placed on the table when a song began playing on the jukebox. George was a warrior from the land of the midnight sun with a Thompson gun for hire, fighting to be done. Merry Christmas, George, said a song he hated so much, played on Merry Christmas, Boss Mike said. Lifting his beer, George looked around the bar, wondering if he could see who played the song. In one corner sat two men in dark suits. One of them smiled a crooked smile as he raised a beer in his direction. Agent Smith. George smiled back as he raised a middle finger with one hand while lifting his beer in the other. Smith laughed and drank his beer. When Smith and Jones finished their beer, they came to George's table. Well, the last two surviving members of Strike Force. Charlie having a beer together. That is what you used to call yourself back in the day, wasn't it? If he asked just two old friends sharing a beer, nothing illegal about that, is there? It is the Christmas season after all, of course not. Smith said. He pulled up a chair and sat next to George. He pointed to a very attractive waitress wearing a short skirt. You know, she's been checking you out ever since you two walked in here. Yeah, so probably checking this out, with the added, pointing to the scar on his face. No, I don't think so. What do you think, he asked, looking up at Jones, shook his head. No, definitely not. Jones said. Smith looked back at George. No, she's got the hots for you. I'm a federal agent. I can tell these things. You know, maybe if you play your cards right, you can get a piece of that this evening. It's okay. We checked her out. Her name's Maria. She's very single, and she's not working for the Russians. Jones snickered at that. George understood the reference. You're just a regular comedian, aren't you? Maybe she's working for you. George said. Smith shook his head. Nah, too pretty. Trust me, she wants you better, yet you won't need to ask for lawyers' guns or money if you hook up with her. He chuckled as he stood up and patted George's shoulder. Keep up the good fight, George, and Merry Christmas. George laughed. Merry Christmas to you too, Jones. Thanks, Jones said as they walked out of the bar. George and Mike watched as the two agents walked out of the bar. Well, what do you think? Mike asked, just two friends having a beer. He said his eyes wandered to the pretty young waitress as he watched. She looked at him several times with a smile on her face. To answer your question, though, I think I just might introduce myself to Maria. Mike laughed as he finished his beer. You dog, I'm going home while I can still walk. You have a good evening. I will talk to you later. Mike headed out of the bar, and George turned his gaze back to Maria. Merry Christmas to me, he said to no one in particular as he motioned for her to come to his table. Yes, he decided it would be a Merry Christmas with her in his bed, and so we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button, and if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet,